You've found the Stealth Podcast. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? Subscribe and comment to support us. Thanks. Let's begin. My name is Darren Kowalski. I'm 34 years old, and I live out of a converted 2003 Ford E350 that I gutted and rebuilt myself over the course of 8 months in my brother's driveway in Amarillo. I've been doing this for about 2 years now. No rent, no landlord, no alarm clock unless I set one. Just me, the road, and whatever comes next. This particular trip, I wasn't alone. My girlfriend, Priya Mehta, 31, had taken 2 weeks off from her job at a logistics company in Dallas to come with me. She'd never done anything like this before. Not real van life, not sleeping in a parking lot or a back road with the engine off and the world going quiet around you. She was excited about it the way people are when they haven't actually done it yet. Cute little journal, new hiking boots still stiff at the ankle, a playlist she'd been building for 3 weeks. Her energy was good though, infectious even. We've been rolling since Thursday. Hit Palo Duro Canyon first, spent a night there legally, woke up to that red rock sunrise that makes you feel like you're on another planet. Then we drifted south, no hard plan. That's the thing about living in a van, you don't need a plan. You just follow the road until something pulls you over. What pulled us over was Lake Meredith. I'd passed through the Panhandle enough times to know the name, but I'd never actually stopped. It sits out there northwest of Amarillo, this big reservoir carved in a flat, dry country that doesn't seem like it should have a lake in it all. The water level's been low for years. Drought does that. And it gives the whole place this exposed, skeletal look. The cliffs are pale and cracked. The shoreline retreated way back from where it used to be, leaving behind this wide ring of cracked mud and dead brush. It looks less like a lake and more like something that used to be one. We got there late in the afternoon, maybe 4:30. Found a pull-off road that curved around behind one of the craggy ridge lines, away from the main recreation area. There was a rusted gate across the road, but it wasn't locked, just swung open when I pushed it. Priya gave me that look, the one where her left eyebrow goes up a little higher than the right. "Is this legal?" she asked. I told her probably not technically, but that the gate was open and there were no signs posted and nobody was around for miles. She wrote something in her journal and let it go. That was one of the things I liked about her. She asked the question, noted the answer, and moved on. No drama. We parked on a flat stretch of caliche about 40 yards past the gate, facing the water. The sun was getting low and painting everything amber and rust. The lake's surface was still, the kind of still that looks almost solid. I made dinner on the 2-burner propane stove, canned black beans, eggs, some leftover tortillas going a little stiff at the edges. Priya sat outside in her camp chair with her feet up on the bumper, writing in that journal of hers, occasionally reading something out loud that made us both laugh. It felt easy, comfortable, the kind of evening that makes you wonder why you ever bother with apartments and leases. We cleaned up around 8, tucked everything back into the van. The temperature had dropped fast the way it does out in the Panhandle once the sun checks out. Probably 15 degrees in under an hour. Priya pulled on a fleece, and I fired up the little diesel heater mounted under the passenger seat. Let it run for 20 minutes until the inside of the van was warm enough to sit comfortably. We had a string of low-voltage amber lights along the ceiling and a Bluetooth speaker running something low and acoustic. From the outside, I imagine we looked like a tiny lit-up cabin floating in all that dark. Priya fell asleep first, around 10. She was a back sleeper, arms crossed loosely over her chest, completely out within minutes. I envied that. I've always been a bad sleeper in new places. My brain does this thing where it keeps cataloging sounds, trying to sort them into categories. Normal, explainable, ignore. I lay there listening to the heater tick and the wind move against the van's panels and some kind of bird out over the water making a sound I didn't recognize. Probably a night heron. Probably. I fell asleep eventually, somewhere past midnight. And then I woke up at 2:17 a.m. I checked my phone for no reason I could name. Not a sound, not a movement. Just awake, instantly, the way you sometimes are when your body's decided something without telling your brain yet. I lay still for a full minute. The heater had cycled off. The speaker had auto-stopped. It was quiet in that specific way that open land gets quiet at night. not silent, but without anything human in it. I told myself it was nothing, rolled onto my side, closed my eyes, and then I noticed that the van smelled different. Not bad, not like something was burning or leaking. Different in a way I couldn't immediately place. Something damp, organic, like creek mud or wet leaves, except we were on dry caliche in the middle of the panhandle and it hadn't rained in weeks. I lifted my head and sniffed again, and Priya shifted in her sleep and mumbled something that wasn't words, and the moment passed. I put it in the explainable, probably category and went back to sleep. Morning came gray and flat. Priya was up before me, which was unusual. She's not a natural early riser. I found her standing outside with coffee already made, staring at the mud flat that ran between us and the waterline. She didn't say anything when I came out, just pointed. There were marks in the dried mud about 20 feet from the van. Not footprints exactly, more like long, irregular grooves, the kind you might make if you drag something heavy across soft ground. They started somewhere off to the left, past the edge of my sight line, and ended at the water. Or started at the water and ended somewhere off to the left. Hard to say which direction. I walked over and looked at them up close. They were real, pressed deep, with clean edges, not like something the wind had done. Priya stood with both hands wrapped around her mug and watched me crouch over them. Animal, she said. I said, yeah, probably. Some big animal. A deer, maybe, or a feral hog. There are plenty of those in Texas. She nodded slowly, wrote something in her journal. We didn't talk about it again that morning, but I caught her looking back at the marks twice while we were packing up the camp chairs, and I didn't say anything because I'd been looking at them too. We decided to stay a second night. That was my call, and I want to be clear about that. Priya didn't push for it. If anything, she'd gone a little quiet after the mud marks. And quiet for Priya meant she was processing something she hadn't decided how to say yet. But the spot was good. The weather had cleared into one of those perfect West Texas days where the sky goes so blue, almost hurts, and I talked myself into believing that whatever made those grooves was long gone and irrelevant. We spent the day exploring the shoreline on foot. The lake out here is nothing like what you'd picture. No sandy beach, no gentle slope into the water. The old water line, the one from before the drought really hit, is marked on the cliff faces about 30 feet above the current surface. Everything below that old line is pale and stripped like the inside of a bone. The ground between the cliffs and the current water's edge is this wide, cracked plain of dried silt that shifts and crumbles under your boots. We found old fence posts out in the middle of it, long submerged and now exposed, the wood black and soft. Priya thought that was beautiful in a bleak kind of way. She photographed everything. Around 2 in the afternoon, we found the boat, or what was left of it, a flat-bottomed aluminum fishing boat, half buried in the silt about 300 yards from the waterline. The hull was caved in on one side, the kind of damage you get from impact, not time. There was a rope still tied to the bow cleat, the other end disappearing into the cracked mud. Priya asked how long it had been there. I said it was hard to tell. Aluminum doesn't rot, and the drought had exposed things that had been underwater for years. She crouched and looked at the damaged side for a long moment without saying anything. We ate lunch sitting on a flat rock above the silt plain, peanut butter on crackers, an apple we split between us, instant coffee from the thermos. From up there, you could see the van, small and white against the pale caliche, and the long shadow it threw in the afternoon light. You could also see from that elevated angle that the drag marks in the mud weren't 2 or 3 isolated grooves. They were everywhere, dozens of them running in different directions across the silt flat, most of them ending at the water's edge. From ground level, you could only see the ones closest to the van. From up here, the whole plain looked like something had been crossing it repeatedly for a long time. Priya saw it the same moment I did. She didn't gasp or grab my arm. She just stopped chewing and went still, and I watched her eyes move across the flat, following the lines. After a moment, she said, very quietly, "Darren, just my name." I said I saw it. We sat there for another minute, neither of us moving, watching the lake sit still and flat and give nothing away. Then she screwed the lid back on the thermos, packed up the crackers, and stood up. "We should go back to the van," she said. Not panicked, just decided. Back at the van, I spent an hour on my phone trying to pull up anything about Lake Meredith, incidents, reports, anything weird. The signal was weak and most pages loaded halfway. I found a few old fishing forums, a National Park Service page about the water levels, a local news story from 2019 about a body recovered near the Stanford Lake area, a man in his 50s found in the shallows, cause of death listed as undetermined. I showed it to Priya. She read it twice. Then she said she was going to make dinner. And she did, moving around the van's small kitchen space with a kind of focused efficiency that I recognized as her way of managing something she wasn't ready to say out loud. I woke up at 1:40 a.m. and Priya was sitting up in the bed, completely rigid, both hands flat on her thighs. I knew immediately she'd been awake for a while. I put my hand on her back and she flinched, not dramatically, just a small involuntary tightening. And then she exhaled and leaned back. I whispered, "What's wrong?" She whispered back, "There's something outside." I listened. For the first 30 seconds, nothing. Then I heard it, a low, intermittent sound that I can only describe as pressure against the underside of the van. Not banging, not scratching. Pressure, like weight being shifted beneath us, the way a car frame groans when something heavy leans on it. The van didn't move, but the sound was real. I've slept in this van for 2 years. I know every sound it makes. This wasn't one of them. I reached for my flashlight on the shelf above the bed. A good one, a 1,000 lumen Phoenix. I keep charged for exactly this kind of situation. Priya grabbed my wrist. Not to stop me, exactly. More like she needed something to hold on to. I clicked the flashlight on and aimed it at the small rear window, trying to get the angle on the ground below. All I could see was Kalichi. I moved to the side window. Still nothing. The sound had stopped the moment I turned the light on. Complete stop, instant. Not gradual, not like an animal startled and ran. Just off. We stayed awake until 5 in the morning. I sat with my back against the cab wall, facing the rear doors, flashlight in my lap. Priya sat beside me, shoulders pressed together, and at some point she fell asleep sitting up, her head slowly tipping toward my shoulder. I let her. I kept the light off to preserve the battery and sat in the dark and listened. Nothing came back. Around 5:15, the sky outside the windshield started going from black to gray, and with the light came this gradual, irrational easing of tension, the way daylight lies to you and tells you things are okay now. When it was light enough to see clearly, I got out of the van alone. Priya was asleep against the wall. I didn't wake her. I walked around the vehicle slowly, crouching to look under the frame. The caliche under the van was disturbed. Scraped, in the same way the mud flat had been scraped, but fresher. The pale surface scratched through to the darker layer beneath. The marks were concentrated under the middle of the van, directly below where we slept. They weren't random. They weren't an animal digging for warmth. They were methodical, parallel, like something had been studying the underside of the floor. I stood up and looked out toward the water. The lake was glass still in the early gray light. The silt flat between us and the waterline was empty. But at the very edge of the water, right where the wet margin meets the dry, there was something sitting in the shallows. I couldn't make out what it was from that distance. Dark, low to the surface, partially submerged. Roughly the size of a large duffel bag, or a person curled tightly on their side. I stood there for probably 4 minutes, watching it, waiting for it to move. It didn't. The water didn't ripple around it. The air was absolutely still. I went back inside and woke Priya up and told her we were leaving. She didn't argue, didn't ask questions. She just started moving, pulling on her jacket, shoving her journal into her bag, clicking things into their storage spots with this quick, automatic efficiency. I was already in the driver's seat, key in the ignition. The engine turned over on the first try, thank God, and I did a slow 3-point turn on the caliche, headlights sweeping across the flat. When the beams crossed the waterline, I didn't let myself look. I just straightened the wheel and rolled toward the gate. The gate was closed. Not locked, there was no padlock, but it was latched shut, the kind of simple latch you just lift and push through. Except it had been open when we arrived, and I hadn't touched it since. I sat in the van with the engine idling, staring at it through the windshield. Priya said, softly, "I'll get it." I said no. I got out and opened it myself, moving fast, Not because I thought something was going to happen, but because every nerve in my body had been running hot for the past 4 hours, and fast was the only speed I had left. I swung the gate open, got back in, drove through, left the gate open behind me. We hit the main road just as the sun broke the horizon to the east, flooding the highway in that flat, brilliant early light. I drove toward Amarillo without speaking for almost 20 minutes. Priya had her knees pulled up to her chest, looking out the passenger window at the passing scrubland. Finally, she said, "What do you think it was?" Not a question exactly, more like she was giving me the floor. I told her I didn't know. I said it could have been a person. She said, yeah. I said it could have been something wrong with a person. She said, yeah. Neither of us said anything else about it for a long time. We stopped at a gas station outside of Canyon, Texas. I filled the tank and Priya went inside and came back with 2 large coffees and a paper bag of collages. Those soft check pastry things they sell at gas stations all over Texas. And she handed me mine without making it a moment, just handed it over like it was any other morning. We stood outside in the early sun next to the van, eating, not talking, letting the heat start to build and the ordinary world reassemble itself around us. An 18-wheeler pulled in and idled loud. A kid crossed the parking lot on a bike. The collage was warm and sweet and almost embarrassingly good. I reported what we'd seen, the marks, the sounds, the shape at the waterline, to the National Park Service ranger station in Fritch when we passed through. The ranger, a woman in her 50s with a patient, weathered face, listened to everything I said without writing anything down. When I finished, she asked how long we'd been parked out there. 2 nights, I said. She nodded slowly, asked if we touched anything or moved anything. No, I said. She said she'd send someone out to look around. She didn't seem alarmed. She also didn't seem surprised. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the marks, not the sound under the van, not the shape in the water. The way that ranger listened to me like she'd been waiting for someone to come in and describe exactly that. I never heard back from the Park Service. I looked for news out of the Lake Meredith area for the next 3 months. Anything about a search, a recovery, an investigation. Nothing. Priya and I didn't break up over it, but something between us shifted the way things sometimes do after you've been genuinely scared together. She still comes on trips, but she sleeps lighter now. I know because I do too. And whenever I'm parked somewhere new and the van goes quiet, and I'm lying there in the dark doing that thing my brain does, sorting sounds into categories, normal, explainable, ignore, I think about that shape of the waterline. About how long I stood there watching it. About how it never moved. About how something that's been in the water long enough learns to be very, very still. My name is Darren Kolsch. I'm 34 years old, and I live out a 2009 Ford 350. I converted myself over the course of 8 months in my sister's driveway in Amarillo. I've been on the road full-time for about 2 years now, working remote QA testing for a software company that doesn't care where I am as long as I hit my deadlines. The van has everything: a bed over the wheel wells, a small propane burner, a 12-volt fridge the size of a carry-on bag, and a shelf of paperbacks I keep telling myself I'll rotate out. I never do. Petra Vasquez was riding with me that week. She was 41, a freelance illustrator from Austin who I'd met at a dispersed camping spot near Palo Duro Canyon the previous spring. We weren't together, not exactly. We were the kind of people who kept ending up in the same places and decided to stop pretending that was an accident. She drew in a sketchbook every morning before either of us said a word to each other, which I respected deeply. She had this specific habit of tapping her pen against her bottom lip when she was thinking, fast and rhythmic, like a metronome she didn't know she was running. It used to drive me a little crazy. I'd give anything to hear it now. We'd spent the day driving south from Lubbock on US 84, cutting through flat cotton country that made the sky look almost aggressive in its size. Petra had her sketchbook open on her lap most of the ride, barely looking up. She was working on something she wouldn't let me see, kept the cover angled away whenever I glanced over. I didn't push it. She had a whole interior world that she shared on her own timeline, and I'd learned that trying to speed it up only made her close off entirely. So I drove, listened to podcasts about cold cases neither of us were fully paying attention to, and let the miles go. We were aiming for Possum Kingdom Lake originally, but we'd burned more time than expected at a roadside diner outside Snyder, where the pie was genuinely worth the hour we lost. By the time we got close to the Abilene area, the light was going amber and neither of us had the energy to push another hour east. I pulled up a map on my phone and started looking for somewhere we could park that wouldn't get us rousted by a sheriff before sunrise. That's the constant calculus of van life. Balancing where you want to be against where you're actually allowed to stop. I found it almost by accident. Lake Stanford, Thomas County, tucked up north of the town of Haskell. It wasn't a state park, wasn't a maintained recreation area in any meaningful sense. The map showed a boat ramp and what looked like a caliche road that ran along the eastern shore. Some people had reviewed it on a camping app. 3 posts, the most recent 2 years old, all of them saying some version of quiet, nobody around, good fishing. That was enough for me. Petra looked up from her sketchbook long enough to say, sure, and went back to whatever she was drawing. The road was rougher than I expected. Caliche gives way to packed clay, which gives way to just ruts if nobody's graded it in a while, and this one hadn't been graded in a while. The van groaned on the washboard sections. Petra braced her sketchbook against the dashboard and gave me a look. I told her it would smooth out. It didn't really smooth out. We rattled down, maybe 1.5 miles before the tree line opened up and the lake appeared, dark and wide and very still, the color of old pewter in the last of the evening light. It was genuinely beautiful in a way that felt almost unearned after that drive. I pulled off the track onto a flat patch of hardpack about 30 feet from the water's edge. Killed the engine. The quiet that came in after was the deep kind. Not peaceful, exactly, but weighted. No traffic, no generators, no voices. Just the water making almost no sound at all against the bank, and somewhere behind us in the scrub brush, a single bird doing a call I didn't recognize and couldn't place. Petra finally closed her sketchbook. She looked out at the lake for a long moment without saying anything. Then she said, "This is the kind of place where something happened once." I asked her what she meant. She shrugged. "I don't know. It just has that feeling." I didn't think much of it. Petra said things like that sometimes. She was tuned to atmosphere in a way that I wasn't. And half the time, it was just the artist in her reading the light and the geometry of a place. I got out and stretched, walked to the water's edge, and looked across. The far shore was a dark line of brush and mesquite. No lights over there. No lights anywhere. Actually, no houses visible, no headlights on any road, no cell towers blinking red in the distance. Just the lake and the sky, which had gone from amber to a deep bruised violet. I stood there for a few minutes, and the bird behind us stopped calling. We made dinner. Petra heated up a can of black beans while I cut an avocado that was 1 day past where I'd have liked it, and some corn tortillas that were absolutely fine. We ate sitting in the open side door of the van with our feet dangling, plates on our laps, watching the last of the color leave the sky. It was the kind of meal that costs nothing and feels like more than it is because of where you're eating it. Petra finally showed me what she'd been drawing all day, a long horizontal piece, almost panoramic of the cotton fields we'd driven through, but she'd put figures in them that weren't people exactly. Elongated, wrong proportions, standing between the rows. I looked at it for a second and said, "When did you put those in?" She said, "This morning before we left Lubbock." I hadn't seen anything like that when we were driving. She just smiled and closed the book. We cleaned up without talking much, which was normal for us by that point in the trip. Petra washed the plates with the water jug while I broke down the propane burner and stowed it under the bed platform. There was a rhythm to closing up the van for the night. Everything had a place, and if you didn't put it there, you'd find it on the floor at 2 a.m. when the van shifted. I'd gotten good at the routine. Petra had picked it up fast when she started riding with me. She wasn't precious about space, which made her about the easiest travel companion I could have asked for. I closed the side door, pulled the thermal curtains across the back windows and the windshield, and cracked the roof vent maybe 2 inches for airflow. The temperature had dropped fast once the sun was gone. It does that in West Texas, even in late September. Petra was already in her sleeping bag on the passenger side half of the bed, reading on her phone with the brightness all the way down. I brushed my teeth leaning out the side door, spit into the dirt, and climbed in on my side. The mattress was a 4-inch foam slab I'd cut to fit, and it was fine. Not a hotel. Fine. I'd been asleep maybe 2 hours when I woke up. Not with a start, just opened my eyes in the dark and was immediately flatly awake. That particular kind of awake where your body has already decided something before your brain caught up. The van was quiet. Petra was breathing slow and even beside me. The vent above us was letting in a thin stream of cooler air and the sound of nothing. Genuinely nothing. No wind, no water sounds, no insects. I lay there and listened to the nothing for what felt like a full minute. Then I heard the vehicle. It was distant at first, just the low compression of an engine somewhere back up the Caliche Road. I told myself it was someone turning around. Someone who'd come down the wrong road and was heading back out. That's a completely reasonable thing that happens all the time. I stared at the ceiling of the van and waited for the sound to get quieter. It didn't. It got closer, slowly, and then it stopped. Engine off. No doors. No voices. Just the pop and tick of a hot engine cooling somewhere behind us up the track. Maybe 200 yards away, close enough that I could hear it, but far enough that I couldn't see headlights bleeding around the edges of the curtains. I sat up slowly. Petra stirred but didn't wake. I moved to the back window and very carefully moved the curtain a quarter inch. Pure dark. I could see the shape of the scrub brush against the sky, which had a little ambient light from a partial moon, but no headlights, no flashlights, no movement. Whatever had come down that road had stopped and gone dark. I stayed at the window for 5 minutes. Nothing moved. I told myself it was a local fisherman who knew this spot, someone who'd cut the engine to drift in quietly. People do that. Night fishing is a real thing. I lay back down. Petra made a small sound in her sleep, something that wasn't a word. Sleep didn't come back the same way. I kept surfacing every 20 minutes or so, listening hard for a few seconds, finding nothing, and sinking back down. Around 3 a.m., I came up again, and this time I heard something I couldn't rationalize quite as easily. A sound from the water side of the van. Not the engine again, something else. A wet, dragging sound. Slow and intermittent, like something being pulled across mud at the waterline. I lay absolutely still and counted the intervals. Every 8 or 9 seconds, the sound. Then nothing. Then the sound again. I've heard turtles. I've heard nutria, those big swamp rodents that sound wrong for their size. I've heard logs shifting in current. I went through the whole list in my head, lying rigid in my sleeping bag, going through every mundane explanation I could construct, and the list wasn't long enough. The sound stopped after about 4 cycles and didn't come back. I didn't move for a long time after that. I just stayed still, breathing through my nose, ears working so hard they started generating their own phantom sounds to fill the void. Morning came gray and slow. When I finally unlatched the side door and stepped out, the ground near the waterline was soft from some moisture I hadn't noticed the night before, a little band of damp clay at the edge of the lake. I walked over and looked at it without really thinking about what I was looking for. There were marks in it, long, parallel impressions in the mud, evenly spaced, running from the water's edge toward the bank and stopping about 4 feet short of the grass line. They didn't look like animal tracks. They looked like something had been dragged, or like something had dragged itself. Petra came out with 2 mugs of instant coffee and handed me one. She looked at where I was looking. She didn't say anything for a second. Then she said, "Fish jump sometimes. They flop around on the bank." I said, "Yeah." I picked up my coffee and didn't look at the marks again, but I took a picture of them before I got back in the van. I still have the picture. I've showed it to 3 people. 2 of them said they didn't know what made it. The third one didn't say anything at all, just handed my phone back to me. We should have left that morning. I know that now, in the specific, stomach-dropping way, you know something after the fact, when the reasons that seemed reasonable at the time have been completely erased by what came next. But we didn't leave. Petra wanted to sketch the lake in the morning light, and it really was something: low fog sitting on the water, the mesquite on the far bank catching the early sun, a great blue heron standing motionless in the shallows, maybe 40 feet out, like it had been placed there by someone with a very precise idea of composition. I drank my coffee and watched the heron and didn't say anything about the marks. I walked the bank north while Petra set up her spot near the van. The Caliche Road came back into view after about 100 yards, and I looked up it into the scrub. I could see the place where the vehicle had stopped. There were tire tracks in the soft shoulder. Wide tires, deeper tread than a passenger car. Something heavier. A truck, probably. The track stopped, and then they came back out. Whoever had parked there had turned around at some point and left, though I hadn't heard them go. The turning radius was tight. They'd done a careful 3-point in a narrow spot, not a panicked U-turn. That deliberateness sat in my chest in a way I didn't like. I didn't tell Petra about the tire tracks. This is the part one go back to most when I replay the whole thing. I made a decision in that moment, partly because I didn't want to scare her over what might genuinely be nothing, and partly, if I'm being honest, because I wasn't sure I wanted to say it out loud and make it real. So I walked back to the van, refilled my coffee, and spent the morning doing some remote work on my laptop while Petra drew. She worked for almost 3 hours straight. I watched her from the corner of my eye sometimes and thought about how completely she disappeared into it, how thoroughly she could shut out everything around her when she was in that mode. Around noon, we got company. A man came down the road in a white Chevy pickup, mid-2000s rusted wheel wells, a gun rack in the rear window that held a single rifle. He pulled up maybe 50 feet away and climbed out slowly. Mid-50s, I'd say. Rancher build, wide through the shoulders, a face that had been outside for 40 years. He stood by his truck and looked at us without moving toward us. I got out and raised a hand. He nodded once, barely. I walked over and he said, not unkindly, "This is county property. You're not supposed to be down here overnight." I said I hadn't seen any signs. He said, "There's one at the road." He wasn't aggressive about it, just flat, like a man who states facts. I apologized and said we'd pack up. He didn't move to leave. He just stood there, and after a second he said, "You all been here since last night?" I said yes. He looked at the lake. He said, "You see anything?" The way he asked it wasn't curious. It was careful. There's a difference. I said we heard a vehicle come in after dark, thought it might be a fisherman. He looked at the lake for another moment and then back at me. He said, it wasn't a fisherman. He didn't offer anything else. I waited. He looked at Petra, who had stopped drawing and was watching us from her camp chair. He said, "Get your things together and take the road straight out. Don't stop." We packed up fast. Petra didn't ask me what he'd said until we were back on the Caliche Road heading out. I told her exactly what he'd said, word for word. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why wouldn't he just say what he meant?" I didn't have an answer for that. We hit the pavement and I turned north and got us up to highway speed. Neither of us said much for a while. I checked the rearview mirror more than I needed to. The man in the truck didn't follow us out. I didn't see him do anything. He just stood by his truck and watched us go, and the last thing I saw when the scrub closed behind us was him still standing there, still looking at the lake. I should have gone straight to Haskell, gotten gas, found a Walmart parking lot, done the sensible, boring thing. I know, but Petra said she was hungry, and I was hungry, and there was a diner in Rule, a tiny little town about 20 miles south that some forum had mentioned. Small town Texas diner. We figured eggs and coffee, sit somewhere with people around, and let the weird residue of the morning settle. So we went to Rule. Population around 600. One main drag. The kind of town where you notice a van with out-of-state plates because there isn't much else to notice. The diner was called Marfa's, which seemed like a lot of name for a place in Rule, but whatever. Red vinyl booths, a counter with 6 stools, a ceiling fan that wobbled on every third rotation. The woman who seated us was maybe 60, hair the color of nickels, and she looked at us for just a half second longer than was strictly normal before she smiled and handed us laminated menus. I ordered eggs and toast. Petra got a chicken fried steak because she has no fear. We sat there and ate, and it was good, and it was normal, and I was starting to breathe at a regular rate again. And the man at the counter turned around on his stool. He'd been there when we came in, sitting with his back to us, coffee in front of him. Now he turned and looked at us directly. He was younger than I'd have expected from a back-of-the-head impression. Maybe late 30s, but worn. He had the specific look of someone who hasn't slept the way other people sleep. He looked at us for a moment and then said, calmly and without any particular emotion, "You came from the lake." It wasn't a question. Petra's fork stopped moving. I said yes. He nodded slowly. He turned back to his coffee without another word. The ceiling fan wobbled overhead. Petra looked at me across the table. I looked back at her. Nobody in the diner seemed to find any of this remarkable. We left Marfa's without finishing our coffee. I left cash on the table and didn't wait for change, which is not something I normally do. Petra was in the van before I was. She didn't say, "Let's go," or "We need to leave." She just moved the way you move when your body makes a decision without consulting the rest of you. I pulled out of Rule's Main Street and got us back on a state road heading east. I didn't have a destination. I just wanted distance between us and whatever thread had been pulling tight since the night before. Petra sat with her knees up, feet on the dash. She didn't open her sketchbook. She said, "Okay, so what was that?" Not as a question, really, more as an acknowledgement that something needed to be named. I said I didn't know. I said the man at the lake telling us to leave was probably just a territorial local, and the guy at the diner maybe recognized the van from the road. She said from the road. I said maybe he'd driven past us on the Caliche Road or seen us at a gas station. She said he knew we came from the lake specifically. I said yes. She said okay, in a tone that meant she was filing it somewhere she wasn't going to let go of. I drove east on US 380. The land opened back up into that massive, flat West Texas expanse. You can see weather coming from an hour away out there. The sky is just huge and unobstructed, and the clouds have room to build into actual architecture. I watched the thunderhead stacking itself up to the south and thought about nothing in particular, which was a relief. Petra eventually pulled out her phone and started looking things up. I asked what she was looking for. She said she was reading about Lake Stanford. I said, what did she find? She said, not much. There was a drowning in 2019, 2 kids. Before that, not much recent. Older stuff, before they flooded it, there were homesteads there. A whole community. I said, what happened to it? She said, they relocated people. Built the dam. The town's been underwater since 1953. That's a thing that's more common than people realize. Drowned towns, communities submerged by reservoir projects. Lake Texoma has one. So does Toledo Bend. There's something about the idea that has always sat uneasily with me. The notion of a place that still exists, technically just under 70 feet of water. Old roads, old foundations, old cemeteries, in some cases that they didn't fully clear before the water came up. I said that out loud, the cemetery thing. Petra said, yeah, that was in one of the articles. They moved the markers, but not all the remains. I let that sit. We stopped for gas in Throckmorton. I filled the tank and went inside for water, and while I was at the counter, the woman at the register, maybe 45, reading glasses pushed up on her head, looked at my card and said, "You coming from the west?" I said, "Yeah, Haskell area." She nodded. She ran the card. Then she said, without looking up, "You staying out by the lake?" I felt something tightening in my neck. I said we had been. We were moving on. She handed the card back. She said, "Good. That's all. Just good." She went back to whatever she'd been doing before I walked in. I sat in the van for a moment before starting it. I turned to Petra. I said, she asked about the lake. Petra looked at me. She said, "I heard." I said, "What does everyone know?" She said, "I don't think everyone knows. I think some people know." I turned the key. We sat there idling for a moment. I said, "Know what though? What is it that they know?" Petra looked out the windshield at the 2-pump gas station and the flat road and the enormous sky. She said, "I think whatever came out of the water last night, I don't think it was the first time." I drove. My hands were doing the right things on the wheel, but the rest of me was somewhere else. I kept thinking about the marks in the mud. Parallel lines, evenly spaced, running from the water line toward the bank. I pulled out my phone at a stop sign and looked at the picture again. Petra leaned over. She looked at it for a moment, and then she said, "Those are too wide apart for any animal I know." I said, "Maybe a large snapping turtle." She said, "I've seen snapping turtles. They leave claw marks. These are smooth." She handed the phone back. She looked out her window. She said quietly, "They go in both directions." I looked at the picture again. She was right. The lines ran from the water toward the bank, and then from the bank back toward the water. Whatever it was had gone back in. We made it to Breckenridge by late afternoon. It's a small city, 10,000 people, Stevens County seat, with a motel strip along the main road and a Dairy Queen and a Dollar General and the bones of something that used to be more prosperous. We got a motel room. I paid cash. A real room, a real bed, walls that didn't flex when the wind hit. Petra showered for a long time. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched the local news on a TV that was mounted too high on the wall. Nothing about a lake. Nothing about Haskell County. Weather, a school board meeting, a calf roping event. Normal Texas evening news. We ordered pizza and ate it on the bed and watched something neither of us cared about on cable. Around 9, Petra turned the TV off and we lay in the dark, and I thought she was asleep when she said, "Do you think it was still there when that man was standing by the lake?" I said I didn't know what she meant. She said, "The rancher, or whatever he was, when we drove out and he was standing there looking at the water. Do you think it was in the water?" And he knew. I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer that helped. I stared at the ceiling of the motel room. It had a water stain in the corner, brown and old, branching like something organic. I looked at it for a long time. At 11:15, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, Texas area code. I answered it because I'm an idiot and I always answer unknown calls because I'm waiting for some context-dependent thing to resolve itself at all times. There was a pause, and then a voice, male, not young, flat cadence said, "You took pictures." I didn't say anything. He said, "You need to delete them." I said, "Who is this?" He said, "It doesn't matter who this is. Delete the photos and don't come back to that county." And then he was gone. Dial tone. Petra was sitting up looking at me. I showed her the number. She typed it into her phone and searched it. Nothing. Completely unlisted. She looked at me, and for the first time in 2 years of knowing her, I could see that she was actually shaken. Not performing concern, not being atmospheric about it. Actually shaken. I deleted the photos in front of Petra. All of them. The mud marks, the wide shot of the bank, the one I'd taken to the tire tracks in the Caliche Road. She watched me do it, and then she watched me empty the recently deleted folder too. And then she said, "Do you think that actually matters?" I said I didn't know, but I wasn't going to find out the hard way. She nodded. We both knew that I'd already sent one of them, the clearest shot of the marks, to my cloud backup about an hour after I'd taken it. I didn't bring that up. She didn't ask. I didn't sleep. Not in any real sense. I'd close my eyes and my body would go horizontal and something that wasn't quite sleep would happen for 30 minutes, and then I'd surface. The motel was quiet. This was a Tuesday night in Breckenridge, not exactly high traffic, and the parking lot outside the window was lit by a single orange sodium lamp that threw a flat, steady light through the gap in the curtains. I could see the van from where I lay, just the shape of it, reliable and known. Around 1 a.m., I noticed a truck parked 2 spots down that hadn't been there when we checked in. White, mid-2000s for what I could tell in that light. I stared at it for a long time. I couldn't see the wheel wells clearly enough to know if they were rusted. I didn't wake Petra. I watched the truck for about 40 minutes. Nothing happened. No movement, no one in the cab as far as I could see. Eventually, I made myself look away and stare at the ceiling instead. And when I looked back, the truck was still there and still empty, and I told myself I was pattern matching on a white pickup truck in Texas, which is like pattern matching on a blue sky. It means nothing because they're everywhere. I closed my eyes. At some point, actual sleep took me. And when I woke up, it was 5:30 and gray outside, and the truck was gone. We were on the road before 6. Petra had her coffee in a thermos and her sketchbook closed in her lap. I drove east on US 180, aiming generally toward Fort Worth, which had the combined virtues of being far from Haskell County and having a lot of people in it. The sun came up behind us, slow and flat, filling the van with that low eastern light that turns everything amber and peaceful. It was almost enough to make the whole previous day feel like it had happened to someone else. Almost. Petra put her hand on my forearm for a moment without saying anything, which I understood to mean several things at once. We stopped at a truck stop outside Palo Pinto, and I called my sister. Not to tell her anything specific. I just called her the way you call someone when you need a voice that belongs to ordinary life. She talked for 15 minutes about her kids and a plumbing issue in her bathroom and a neighbor dispute involving a property line and a row of Photinia shrubs. I laughed twice. Real laughs. Petra was inside, getting breakfast sandwiches. When she came back out, I was still on the call, and she set a sandwich on the dashboard in front of me and sat in the passenger seat and started drawing. The parking lot, the trucks, the overpass in the distance. Normal things. just drawing normal things. We hit the western edge of Fort Worth by early afternoon. Traffic, construction, the whole familiar friction of a city. I'd never been so glad to be in traffic in my life. We went to a friend of Petra's, a woman named Sue, who had an apartment in the cultural district and a fold-out couch and absolutely no interest in ghost stories or what we'd been doing in West Texas. She made us tea and showed us pictures from a trip to Portugal and let us sit in her clean, well-lit apartment and just exist without explaining anything. It was one of the best things I've ever experienced. I looked up Lake Stanford that night on Sua's laptop while Petra and Sua talked in the kitchen. The reservoir was built in 1953 by the double mountain fork of the Brazos River. The town that was flooded was called Swinson. Not exactly, the actual community nearby bore that name, but there were smaller settlements in the valley. There were records of a church, a schoolhouse, a grid of residential streets. The dam project relocated around 200 families. I found one reference in a county historical archive that someone had partially digitized to a complaint filed in 1952 by a family who said the survey crew had found something in one of the buildings near the water line and refused to describe what it was in the public record. The complaint was about the lack of transparency. The response from the county, filed 6 weeks later, said only, "The matter has been addressed and presents no ongoing concern." I sat with that for a while. I never went back to Lake Stanford. Petra and I kept traveling together for another 4 months after that, and we talked about a lot of things, but we developed an unspoken agreement to never go west of Abilene again. I don't know what came out of that water. I don't know if the rancher knew what he was watching for or if he'd been watching for a long time. I don't know who called my phone, how they got the number, or how they knew about the pictures. What I know is this. The marks in the mud ran from the water to the bank and back to the water. Whatever made them came up, and then it went back down. And the lake is still there, full of old roads and old foundations. And at the eastern boat ramp, there's a sign you apparently have to look for if you want to see it, and nobody around their fishes after dark. Nobody who's been there long, anyway. Petra moved to Marfa, the actual Marfa, far west Texas, about 8 months after all this. She sent me one of her prints as a going-away gift. It was the panoramic piece, the cotton fields, the long horizontal one with the figures standing between the rows. I told her I liked it that first night. In the bottom corner, she'd signed it, and under her signature written 4 words, "They go back in." I have it on the wall of the van. Above the shelf of paperbacks, I still haven't rotated out. Some nights I look at it for a while before I turn the light off. Most nights I don't. My name's Harlon Whitaker. I'm 48 years old, and these days I call my 2019 Sprinter van home after everything fell apart back in Albuquerque. I left the warehouse job, the empty house, and the arguments that never ended. Right now I'm rolling solo through the Texas Hill Country, with just my old mutt Riley for company. He's a gray-muzzled lab mix who gets anxious around new people, but settles quick once the doors are locked. Tonight, I found this quiet gravel pull-off off FM 1431 near Marble Falls, tucked behind some cedar trees with a view of the lake in the distance. It felt low-key enough for stealth camping. No signs, no houses close by, just the kind of spot other vanlifers sometimes mention in forums. I killed the engine, cooked up some beans and rice on the little stove, and watched the sun drop while Riley sniffed around the tires. The air cooled fast once darkness settled, carrying that dry cedar smell mixed with distant water. I cracked a beer, sat in the sliding door, and scrolled through my phone, texting my daughter back home about the route. She worries when I go off-grid like this, but I told her it's peaceful out here. No city lights, no traffic. Just me, Riley, and the quiet. I did my usual checks, windows covered with the blackout curtains, door locked, a small bungee on the handle for extra peace of mind. Riley curled up on his bed by the passenger seat like always. Everything felt normal, the kind of night I'd had dozens of times before. I climbed in the bed up top around 10, left one vent cracked for air, and listened to the soft tick of the van cooling down. Sleep came easy at first. Then around 1:30, I woke up thirsty. I reached for the water bottle without turning on the lights, moving careful not to wake Riley. That's when I noticed how still everything was outside. No wind, no bugs, nothing. I took a sip and laid back down, but my mind kept turning over small stuff, like how the gravel looked undisturbed when we pulled in, yet I thought I saw fresh tire marks overlapping mine. Probably nothing, just paranoia from too many solo nights. Riley sighed in his sleep, and I told myself to relax. I must have dozed off again because the next thing I felt was Riley shifting restlessly. He didn't bark, just stared toward the rear doors with his ears up. I whispered to him and listened hard. Nothing. Still, that heavy, quiet pressed in, the kind that makes the hair on your arms stand up even when you know it's silly. I checked my phone. No signal. Typical out here. I rolled over and tried counting breaths like my ex taught me for anxiety. It worked for a bit. The van felt safe, familiar, my little rolling fortress. Another hour passed in fits. I got up to piss in the portable bottle so I wouldn't have to open the door. While I stood there in the dark, I caught a faint metallic scent on the air, like old blood or wet iron from the lake maybe. Nothing alarming, I figured. Texas backroads have all sorts of smells. Riley stayed quiet, which was good. He's usually the first to notice deer or raccoons. I climbed back into bed and pulled the blanket up, telling myself morning would come soon and I'd drive on toward Llano for coffee and supplies. The silence stretched longer than it should have. I started thinking about that one time in Nevada when a drunk guy knocked on my van at 3 a.m. asking for gas money. Scary in a moment, but harmless. This felt different though, heavier. I closed my eyes again, heart beating a little faster than normal, but nothing happened. Just the dark and the waiting. I woke to Riley growling low in his throat, a sound he almost never makes. The clock on my phone read 3:47 a.m. I stayed perfectly still, hand on his collar, listening. A soft scraping came from somewhere near the front wheel, like boots on gravel, moving slow. Then it stopped. I whispered, "Easy boy," and eased up to peek through a tiny gap in the curtain. Nothing but blackness and the faint outline of cedars. My mouth went dry. I told myself it was probably an armadillo or something, but my gut didn't buy it. I sat there for what felt like 20 minutes, barely breathing. Riley settled, but kept watching the door. That's when I heard a low cough, human sounding, off to the right side of the van. Not close, but not far either. My mind raced through practical stuff. Should I start the engine and roll out? But the keys were up front, and I'd have to move around. Bad idea in the dark. Instead, I grabbed the heavy mag light I keep for defense and waited. The cough didn't repeat. Minutes dragged by in total silence again. Eventually, I risked cracking the side window an inch. Cool air rushed in carrying that same metallic smell, stronger now. I shone the flashlight out quick, just a flash. Empty gravel, my own tire tracks, and what looked like a dark smear on the ground, maybe 10 feet away. Could be oil from my van. I killed the light fast, so I wouldn't give away my position. Riley pressed against my leg, trembling a little. I scratched his ears and tried to act calm for both of us, the way you do when your kid wakes from a nightmare. Sleep was gone. I made coffee on the stove real quiet, using the smallest burner, and thought about the fellow I met 2 days ago at a campsite near Austin. Nice guy, ex-military, warned me about sticking to established spots in Texas because some rural areas have old family feuds and folks who don't like strangers. I laughed it off then. Now I wondered. Around 5 a.m. the sky started to lighten, just enough that shapes appeared. No one out there. I let Riley out on leash for a quick bathroom run, staying right by the door. He sniffed the smear on the ground and backed away fast, tail tucked. I cleaned up camp in record time, deciding to drive out at first light. But the van wouldn't start right away. Clicking sound, battery maybe low from the fan I left on. I cursed under my breath and popped the hood, working by headlamp. Everything looked normal. After a few tries it turned over. Relief hit me hard. I pulled out onto the FM road, windows down, radio on low for company. The hills looked peaceful in the dawn. I even cracked a joke to Riley about how we both needed more coffee after that false alarm. We made it about 8 miles before I spotted something in the rear view that didn't sit right. A beat-up white pickup had appeared behind me, keeping distance. Probably just a local rancher. I shook it off and kept driving toward the next small town. The white pickup stayed with me for 20 minutes before turning off. I stopped in Burnett for gas and breakfast tacos, letting Riley stretch while I checked the van over again. The attendant, An older woman with kind eyes asked if I was passing through. I said yes and mentioned the pull-off near Marble Falls. Her smile faltered for a second. She told me some folks around there had reported odd goings-on lately, but didn't elaborate. I paid and left, feeling that unease creep back. Back on the road, I found another quiet spot by the Colorado River late afternoon. This one a public access point with a few trees for cover. It seemed safer, open enough to see anyone coming. I set up, fished a little, caught nothing, and cooked dinner while the sun set orange over the water. Riley played with a stick like old times. For a couple hours, everything felt right again, the kind of evening that makes van life worth it. I even called my daughter and laughed with her about Riley's latest demise. Night fell heavier than the one before. Around midnight, I heard what sounded like splashing in the river, regular like someone waiting. I told myself fishermen or kids, but the river looked too dark and fast for that. Riley wouldn't settle. I stayed up reading by red headlamp, trying to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. Then came a soft knock on the rear door, 3 times polite, almost. My blood ran cold. I didn't answer. The knocking stopped. Footsteps circled the van once, slow. I gripped the mag light and my camping knife, heart hammering so loud I worried they'd hear it. No voices, no demands. Just a movement. I whispered to Riley to stay quiet, and he did, bless him. Minutes stretched into an eternity of silence. When I finally risked a look, I saw a shape crouched by the rear tire, doing something with its hands. It stood up quick when my curtain moved and melted into the trees. I didn't sleep. I sat there until sunrise, jumping at every natural sound. In the morning light, I found deep gouges under the van like someone tried to puncture the fuel line. My hand shook while I patched what I could with sealant. That's when I noticed the smear from last night had followed. Small dark drops leading away into the brush. I packed up fast, deciding to put real miles between me and this stretch of river. Riley seemed as ready as I was. We drove east, aiming for busier roads, but the engine started running rough. I pulled into a mechanic in a tiny town whose name I forget now. He said it'd take a few hours. I waited outside with Riley, trying to act normal while paranoia gnawed at me. The mechanic kept the van longer than expected. Said he found something weird in the fuel filter, fibers like cloth. I paid and got back on the road by late afternoon, heading toward a bigger town for the night. Exhaustion hit hard. I found what looked like a safe Walmart parking lot in Temple, but left after security kicked out other campers. Desperate, I ended up on a rural county road outside town near an old abandoned quarry. It felt hidden, but not too isolated. Big mistake. I barely ate dinner. Riley refused food too. We both sensed it now. Around 10, I heard the white pickup again, engine idling somewhere down the road. Headlights off. I killed every light inside the van and waited in the dark, sweating despite the cool night. Footsteps approached, multiple this time. Low voices arguing. One said something about the last one got away. My stomach twisted. I tried the doors quietly. I had the knife ready, and Riley bared his teeth in silence. A face pressed against the passenger window, pale, eyes wide, covered in what looked like dried mud or worse. It smiled slow, then vanished. The group circled once more before the truck drove off. Relief lasted maybe 10 minutes. Then scratching started under the floor, right beneath my bed. Metal on metal. I moved to the front seats, started the engine, and floored out of there. The van shuddered, but held. In the mirror, I saw flashlights behind me, people running. I didn't stop. Riley whimpered as we bounced down the pitted road. I drove for hours on back roads, half lost, until I found an all-night truck stop, parked under the brightest lights, surrounded by semis. Sleep still wouldn't come. Morning brought some calm. I cleaned up, fed Riley, and decided to push north toward Oklahoma, done with this part Texas. The scratches under the van looked deliberate now. I told myself it was over, just some messed up locals playing games. But the metallic smell lingered inside the van, no matter how much I aired it out. I made it to a rest area near Wichita Falls by midday, exhausted and wired. Riley finally ate. I walked him long, letting the sun warm us both. For the first time in days, the tension eased. I even laughed a little at how paranoid I'd gotten, thinking about telling the story later like some tall tale. We napped in the shade of the van, doors open, people around. It felt safe. Evening came peaceful. I cooked a good meal, watched the stars, and planned the next leg. Around midnight, Riley woke me again, but this time he wagged his tail. I smiled, figuring a friendly trucker. Then the rear door clicked open. I'd forgotten to check the lock after the walk. A figure stepped inside fast, smelling of river mud and iron. Before I could move, pain exploded in my side. Riley lunged, but got kicked hard. More figures followed. They worked quick and quiet, taping my mouth, binding my hands while I thrashed. One whispered it was nothing personal, just needed the van for their route. The pain in my side spread warm and wet. I saw the tools in their hands, rusty sharp. Riley crawled under the bed whimpering. They drove my own van into the night, heading deeper into empty land. I stayed conscious long enough to see them pull off onto a dirt track near an old oil field. They dragged me out first. The last thing I clearly remember is Riley's desperate barking fading as they took him separate. The ground felt cold and damp. They talked about others they'd found on these roads, vanlifers who parked in the wrong forgotten spots. The stars above blurred while the work started. The herding went on longer than I thought possible. They were careful, thorough, like they'd practiced. I thought about my daughter, about unfinished texts, about how stupid I was to trust empty roads. Blood mixed with the gravel and that same metallic smell that followed me for days. Riley's barks stopped eventually. The quiet returned, deeper than before. By the time they finished and rolled the empty van into a pit, the only sound left was wind across the Texas plains. No one would find much. Just another missing traveler who chose the wrong night, the wrong hidden place. The hills swallowed it all, same as always. My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 34 years old, and I've been living full-time out of my converted 2016 Ford Transit van ever since I walked away from my teaching job in Oklahoma City. The divorce cleaned me out emotionally more than financially, so I hit the road with my cat named Toast, a skittish orange tabby who hides under the passenger seat whenever the engine starts. Right now, we're deep in East Texas, those thick pine forests outside Lufkin. I found this overgrown logging road pull-off near the Angelina National Forest. Nothing marked on the maps, just enough space to back in behind some dense brush where passing cars wouldn't spot the van. It felt like the perfect quiet spot after days of driving. I set up my little solar lamp, made a simple pasta dinner, and let Toast explore the steps on her harness while the woods settled around us. The pines smelled strong and resinous as the temperature dropped. I sat outside for a while, journaling about the route ahead toward the Sabine River. Toast batted at a moth, acting more relaxed than usual. I did my normal routine, blackout curtains up, doors double-checked, a small mirror rigged so I could see behind the van without opening anything. Everything felt routine, the kind of setup I'd perfected over 14 months on the road. No other vehicles had passed in hours. I climbed into my bed platform around 11, Toast curled against my legs like always, and listened to a podcast until my eyes got heavy. Sleep came in waves at first. Around 2, I woke up needing the bathroom and used the portable setup inside to avoid going out. The forest was dead quiet, no frogs or crickets, which struck me as odd but not alarming. I lay back down and thought about that one time in Arkansas when a bear had sniffed around camp. Scary in the moment, but manageable. This felt different, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. Toast lifted her head once, but didn't seem bothered. I drifted off again after some deep breathing. Later I stirred because Toast was pacing the narrow aisle. She does that when she wants wet food at weird hours. I whispered to her and reached for the headlamp. That's when I noticed a faint glow through the rear curtain gap, like distant headlights, but stationary. Probably nothing, just reflections or a house I hadn't seen earlier. I fed her a spoonful to settle her. I tried going back to sleep. The van felt solid and safe, my little moving home that had carried me through worse nights. I must have dozed because the next stretch of silence pulled me awake again. No wind in the pines, no movement at all. My mind wandered to disturbing stories I'd read in van life groups about people in remote forests, but I pushed those thoughts away. Practical stuff kept me grounded. I had enough water, food for days, and a full tank. Toast finally settled. I told myself morning would bring birdsong and a quick drive to the nearest coffee spot in Lufkin. The dark stretched on. I started associating the quiet with that horror movie I watched years ago where the woods went unnaturally still before anything bad happened. Silly comparison, but it stuck. My heart beat a little faster for no clear reason. Nothing moved outside. I closed my eyes and focused on Toast's purring, letting it lull me towards sleep once more. A low scrape against the undercarriage woke me sharp around 4. Toast shot under the seat. I froze, listening hard. The sound didn't repeat right away. I grabbed my flashlight and pepper spray, staying low. Minutes passed with nothing but my own breathing. Then came a soft metallic tap near the rear wheel, deliberate, like someone testing the tire pressure. My stomach tightened. I stayed silent, hoping it was an animal. I waited what felt like forever before risking a quick peek. The curtain gap showed only pine trunks and darkness. No lights now. Toast refused to come out. I whispered comforts to her while my mind raced through options: drive out blind or wait out. Driving risked getting stuck on a narrow logging road. I chose waiting and sat with my back against the bed, knees up. The forest stayed unnaturally quiet, amplifying every tiny creak inside the van. Dawn eventually crept in gray and slow. I checked outside carefully. No footprints visible on the pine needles, but a couple of my water jugs had been moved from where I'd left them. Not knocked over, just shifted, disturbing how precise it was. I packed up fast, coaxed Toast in her carrier, and got the van started. The engine noise felt reassuring as I eased forward. No one appeared. I made it to a paved road and stopped at a gas station in Nacogdoches for fuel and breakfast. The clerk seemed friendly enough. I mentioned the logging road casually. He just nodded and said some folks still use those old paths for hunting. I drove south toward Sam Rayburn Reservoir that afternoon, looking for a better spot. Found a dispersed area near the water with a few other campers visible in the distance. It felt safer. I set up, swam a little to wash off the nerves, and let Toast sun herself on the dash. For a few hours the day felt normal again, the scary night fading like a bad dream. I even laughed at myself while cooking, telling Toast we'd become proper road warriors. Evening brought a nice breeze off the lake. I watched the sunset and chatted with my sister on the phone, skipping the weird details so she wouldn't worry. Around 10, I secured everything tighter than usual and settled in. Sleep came easier with the gentle lapping water sounds. Toast relaxed too. I thought the forest episode was behind us. Then the tapping returned near midnight, this time on the side panel, right by my head. 3 measured knocks. I didn't move. The horror of realizing it had followed me made my skin crawl. Toasted again. I gripped the pepper spray and waited in the dark. The knock stopped after a minute. Footsteps moved away through the underbrush. I stayed awake until sunrise, heart pounding every time the wind shifted. Morning light showed nothing obvious, but one of my tire valve caps was missing. Small, but disturbing. I packed and drove toward a busier campground near the reservoir for the day, sticking close to other people. Toast seemed happier with voices around. I hiked a short trail, tried fishing without luck, and tried to shake the paranoia. By late afternoon, I felt steadier. Shared a beer with a retired couple in the next site who told funny stories about their own van breakdowns. Their normalcy helped. I cooked a decent meal and watched fireflies come out as the sky darkened. For a while, the scary tension from the previous nights eased into the background. Toast even played with a leaf. Night fell, and I locked down early. Around 1:30, the van rocked gently, like someone leaning against it. Then came whispers, low, multiple voices discussing the license plate. My blood ran cold. I texted my sister my location with shaking hands, just in case. The voices moved around the van, never loud enough to make out full words. Toast trembled against me. I started the engine without lights and rolled forward slowly. They scattered into the trees. I drove to the main road and pulled into a well-lit gas station lot for the rest of the night. Sleep was impossible. In the morning, I found scratches along the passenger door, deep enough to show metal. The horror of being tracked settled heavy in my chest. I decided to head west toward bigger towns. The van started fine, but the fuel gauge dropped faster than normal. I stopped in a small town for a quick mechanic check. He found nothing obvious but suggested bad gas. I paid and kept moving, sticking to highways. Relief came when I put distance behind me. Toast napped peacefully. I allowed myself to hope it was over. By evening, I reached a quiet rest area near Huntsville. It looked safe with truck traffic. I parked under lights and tried to rest. The disturbing feeling lingered, but nothing happened for hours. Deep into the night, the side door handle rattled hard. I bolted upright. Toast fled to her hiding spot. Someone yanked repeatedly, testing the lock. I shouted that I had a gun, voice cracking. The rattling stopped. Footsteps retreated, but not far. I heard them circling, patient. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I dialed 911. Spotty signal. The call dropped twice. When it finally connected, the dispatcher sounded bored until I mentioned the voices. She said units were on the way. 20 agonizing minutes passed with occasional scrapes under the van. Headlights finally appeared. A sheriff's deputy checked around, found nothing, and told me to move to a better lit truck stop. His tone suggested he thought I was overreacting. I drove there exhausted, parked among the big rigs, and barely slept. Morning brought clearer thinking. I inspected the van thoroughly and found a small tracking device magnet inside the wheel well. Cheap and disturbing. I smashed it. The horror of being followed for days hit fully. I changed my route completely, heading toward the coast for open space. Toast sensed my stress and stayed close. I reached a secluded beach access near Matagorda late afternoon. The Gulf air felt cleansing. I walked the sand with Toast in her harness, letting waves wash over my feet. For a couple hours, peace returned. No one around for miles. I cooked shrimp I bought earlier and watched the sunset, almost believing the nightmare had ended. Night on the coast brought strong wind that masked other sounds. I secured everything and tried sleeping. Around 3, the van shook violently from the rear. Not wind. Something heavy slammed against it. I screamed this time. Toast howled. The attacks grew bolder, rocking the whole vehicle while I braced inside. I started the engine and drove the beach access road in the dark, nearly getting stuck in sand. Headlights appeared behind me, gaining fast. I pushed the van hard until pavement, losing them temporarily in the back roads. I made it to a larger coastal town before dawn and hid the van behind a clothes-bait shop. Toast refused food. I sat there shaking, watching mirrors until sunrise. The relief of daylight let me breathe again. I cleaned up, refueled, and planned to drive straight through to Louisiana. The disturbing events had broken something in me. I missed my old life for the first time in months. Mid-morning, I hit the road with caffeine and determination. Traffic felt protective. Around noon, I stopped for gas and noticed the white SUV that had been behind me for miles. It parked across the street. I left quickly. It followed again. My paranoia peaked into raw fear. I took random turns trying to lose it. The chase ended when they forced me onto a deserted farm road near the border. They boxed me in. 3 men got out, faces covered. They dragged me from the van while I fought and screamed. Toast stayed hidden. One of them laughed softly and said they'd been watching since the pines. The horror became complete when they showed me photos of my previous campsites. They took the van and me to an abandoned rice field barn. The work they did was slow and methodical. I thought about my sister, about unfinished chapters in my journal, about how van life had led me here. Pain blurred everything. They kept me alive long enough to watch them unload my things, dividing them casually. Toast carrier sat silent in the corner. By the end, the Gulf wind carried away most sounds. They buried what remained in the soft soil and drove my cleaned van toward new roads. No one would connect the dots. Another traveler gone, swallowed by the back roads and empty spaces of Texas. The waves kept rolling like nothing had happened. My name is Elias Thorne. I'm 51 years old, and I've been full-timing in my lifted 2008 Chevy Express van for the last 3 years after the layoffs hit the oil fields where I worked outside Houston. I travel with my border collie mix named Scout, a smart, energetic girl who loves chasing lizards but sticks close when I whistle. We're way out in West Texas now, the high desert near Fort Davis, after I took a detour off Highway 118 onto a little-used dirt track by the old Davis Mountain State Park boundaries. Not the main campground, just a hidden flat spot locals sometimes use for stargazing, surrounded by scrub and jagged rocks with zero self-service. I parked at dusk, made a quick dinner of chinchilli heated on the propane stove, and watched the sky explode into that impossible West Texas purple while Scout patrolled the perimeter. The air turned crisp fast once the sun dropped, carrying that clean desert smell of creosote and dust. I sat on the bumper with a coffee, tossing a ball for Scout a few times to burn her energy, then did my usual setup, curtains drawn, door locked, a small solar light inside for reading. Everything felt solid, the kind of peaceful isolation I came out here chasing after years of shift work and noisy neighbors. Scout curled up on her mat by the door, like she always does. I climbed into the raised bed around 10:30, left the roof vent open a crack for the cool air, and listened to the absolute nothing outside. Sleep it quick after a long drive. I woke sometime after 2 with a dry mouth and reached for my water bottle in the dark. The van was still, but Scout had her head up, staring toward the side door without growling. I listened for a long minute, nothing but my own pulse. I figured she heard a rabbit or coyote. Back in my Houston days, I'd wake up from nothing all the time after tough shifts, so I knew how the mind plays tricks at night. I gave her a pat, took a drink, and lay back down, thinking about how different this quiet felt from the city rumble I used to hate. Another stretch of sleep came. Then I stirred again because Scout shifted restlessly, circling once before settling. The silence outside pressed and heavier now, the kind that makes you aware of every small sound inside the van. I thought about that time my buddy's truck broke down near Pecos, and he waited hours for a tow with nothing but stars and wind. Unsettling, but manageable. This felt similar, but thicker somehow. I checked the time on my phone, no signal as expected, and told myself morning coffee and a drive toward Marfa would reset everything. Scout finally relaxed. I dozed in and out until the sky started lightening, just a touch. No strange noises, no movement. I let Scout out on her long leash for a quick sniff around while I stretched my back. The ground looked untouched except for our own tracks. Everything normal. I made breakfast, fed her, and felt that familiar road freedom return. We packed light and rolled out easy, the van handling the dirt track fine. I even laughed a little telling Scout we dodged the tourist spots today. The desert opened up beautiful as the sun rose higher. I stopped once for photos of the mountains, letting Scout run in a safe spot. The night's unease faded like morning fog. By midday, we were cruising toward a new pull-off I'd marked on my map near Balmorhea, feeling good about the wide-open country and the freedom it promised. We reached the spot by late afternoon, a wide, dry wash off a county road with some mesquite for partial cover and views of the distant mountains. I set up camp, let Scout explore on leash, and spent a couple hours fixing a loose cabinet latch inside the van while the heat eased. Nothing felt off. I cooked steaks on the small grill, shared a piece with Scout, and watched the sunset paint the rocks orange. For those hours, everything felt right again, the kind of day that reminds you why you live like this. Night settled clear and cold. I secured the van tighter than usual out of habit and read by headlamp until my eyes got heavy. Scout slept soundly. Around 1, I woke to her ears twitching, but no other signs. I listened hard, still that deep desert quiet. I stepped out briefly to let her do her business, staying right by the door with my flashlight. The beam caught nothing but empty scrub. Back inside, I felt silly for the extra caution and drifted off again. Then came the faint scratching, like claws on the undercarriage, but slower, more deliberate. Scout growled low once and pressed against my leg. I stayed frozen, hand on her collar, waiting for it to repeat. When it did, it moved from front to back, pausing under the fuel tank area. My mind went to practical things, porcupine, maybe a big pack rat, but the rhythm felt too steady. I grabbed my heavy tire iron and waited in the dark, heart picking up speed. The sound stopped after several long minutes. I risked a quick exterior check at first light, finding small divots in the dirt under the van, but no clear tracks. Disturbing how they lined up exactly with the tank. I topped off the fuel from my Jerry can anyway and decided to keep moving toward a busier area near Alpine. Scout seemed eager to leave too. We drove out without issues, the morning sun making last night feel distant. I stopped in Alpine for supplies and a decent meal at a local spot, chatting with the waitress about star parties in the mountains. Her easy laugh helped shake the leftover tension. Scout napped in the shade under the van while I ate. For a few hours, the road felt open and friendly again. I even planned a short hike for the next day. By evening, I found another dispersed spot near the edge of Big Bend Ranch State Park, more open than the last. Setup went smooth, dinner was good, and Scout played fetch until she tired. I watched the Milky Way come out and told myself the desert just takes getting used to. Sleep started easy. The rocking woke me hard around 3:30. The whole van shifted side to side, like someone was pushing on the rear corner. Scout barked sharp and frantic. I yelled out, "Hey!" Voice rough with sleep, and the movement stopped instantly. I sat there gripping the tire iron, listening to my pulse hammer while Scout stayed glued to my side. Long minutes of nothing followed. At dawn, I found handprints in the dust on the rear panel. Large, smear like someone had leaned their full weight. The horror of how quiet they stayed while doing it settled in my gut. I wiped them off fast, packed up, and pushed west, sticking closer to paved roads. Scout wouldn't eat much. I stopped at a roadside park outside Presidio and tried to act normal, but my hands kept shaking when I poured water. Afternoon brought some relief when I joined a small group of campers at a primitive site near the Rio Grande. Shared stories around a fire. Scout relaxed with other dogs nearby. The normal conversation about routes and breakdowns made the previous nights seem like imagination. I laughed at a guy's tire blowout tale and felt the weight lift a bit. But the quiet returned once I was back in the van alone. Around midnight, Scout started whining toward the riverside. Low voices drifted on the wind. Spanish maybe, or something slurred. They faded, then came back closer. I killed all lights and waited. A shadow passed the curtain gap, tall and slow. My mouth went completely dry. I started the engine at first light and left without coffee. The van ran rough, like something was dragging underneath. I pulled over later and found fresh wire wrapped around the drive shaft, tight, intentional. Removing it took an hour of cursing and scraped knuckles. The disturbing realization that they wanted me stuck out here grew heavier with every mile. I aimed for a truck stop near Van Horn for safety in numbers, parked under bright lights among the semis. Scout finally ate. The engine trouble worsened by midday. I limped into a small mechanic shop in a dusty town off I-10. The guy found more sabotage, sugar in the tank mixed with something else. Cost me most of my emergency cash. While waiting, I kept Scout close and watched every vehicle that passed. The paranoia had me jumping at normal sounds. By late afternoon, the van ran again. I drove exhausted toward a remote but well-reviewed boondocking spot in the Guadalupe Mountains foothills. Setup felt mechanical. Scout stayed glued to me. Dinner was quick and tasteless. Night fell fast and cold. Around 11, the scratching returned, louder, under the floor this time, right beneath where I sat. I moved to the driver's seat, ready to roll, but they blocked the tires with rocks while I slept. The horror built as flashlights appeared in the distance, moving in. Multiple figures. Scout growled deep. I barricaded the doors with whatever I had and dialed for help. No signal. They circled slow, patient, tapping the panels like they were checking ripeness. One voice finally spoke near the window, calm and local sounding, saying they'd been clearing out transients from their family land for years. The words landed like ice. I shouted back that I'd leave at first light. They laughed low and moved off. Sleep never came. I spent the night braced and waiting. Dawn let me clear the rocks and drive out shaking. I found a highway patrol station and reported it. The officer took notes, but his face said this wasn't new. He suggested I leave the area entirely. I did, heading east now, done with West Texas. Scout looked as worn out as I felt. For one night, I parked in a busy Midland lot under cameras. Some calm returned. I thought the worst was behind me and allowed a small hope as I planned the long drive back toward familiar ground. I made decent miles the next day, stopping only for fuel and letting Scout run in safe rest areas. The desert gave way to flatter land. By evening, I felt almost normal again, cooking a proper meal and promising Scout better days ahead. She wagged her tail for the first time in days. I let myself believe the nightmare had ended. Deep sleep finally came around midnight in a quiet rest area near Abilene. Then the door lock popped. Someone had worked it while I rested. Scout lunged as a figure climbed in fast. Pain flared hot across my arm from blade. More followed, efficient and silent. They zip-tied me quick while Scout fought until a kick dropped her. They drove my own van north into empty ranch land, talking low about selling the rig after they finished. The pain in my arm spread as they worked on me in the back, slow and deliberate, using tools from my own kit. I thought about my old crew in Houston, about unfinished business, about how stupid pride kept me out here alone. Scout whimpered once, then went quiet. They dragged me out near an old stock tank under a half moon. The ground smelled of alkali and blood. They didn't rush the end. Made sure I felt every cut while describing others they'd taken from these roads. The visual of my own van's headlights lighting their work burned into me until the world narrowed to red and black. By sunrise, they had cleaned the scene. My van, wiped down and repainted rough with stolen supplies, rolled away with new plates toward Oklahoma. Scout's body stayed behind in the tank with mine, weighted down. The desert wind erased the tire tracks over days. Another solo traveler gone. Another van absorbed into the backroads network. No one ever connected Elias Thorne to the quiet disappearance. The plane stayed empty and indifferent, same as always. My name is Calder. I'm 37 years old, and after my photography studio in Santa Fe went under, I moved into my 2021 Ram Pro Master van with my old tabby cat, Miso, who's been my constant companion through the rough patches. We're in the Texas Panhandle now, way out near Palo Duro Canyon after I took a back road off Highway 207 looking for dramatic light for some landscape shots. I found this tucked away flat spot on a BLM-ish stretch of prairie grass and red rock. Not an official campsite, but open enough with views across the canyon rim where the wind moves constant. I parked at sunset, grilled some burgers on my little setup, and let Miso wander the steps on her leash while I framed a few test shots of the layered cliffs glowing orange. The panhandle air felt dry and alive with that constant low whistle through the grass. I sat outside editing photos on my laptop until the light died. Miso curled on my lap, purring like the old days. I did the usual routine. Curtains up, doors secured, a small LED string for soft light inside. Everything felt straightforward, the kind of solo evening I've had plenty since leaving New Mexico. Miso ate her wet food and claimed her spot on the dashboard. I climbed into the bed around 11, left the side vent cracked, and listened to the wind rock the van gently like a lullaby. Sleep came solid after the long drive. I woke thirsty around 2:30 and sipped water without lights. The prairie outside was dark, but the wind kept its rhythm. Miso stayed asleep. I thought about that one winter in Colorado when the van got snowed in and I had to dig out at dawn. Annoying, but part of the life. This felt calmer. I lay back down and let the wind noise fill my head until I drifted off again. Later I stirred because Miso had moved to the passenger seat staring out. No growling, just alert. I listened through the wind, but caught nothing extra. Practical stuff ran through my mind. I had full water tanks, plenty of food, and the van was parked stable. I scratched her chin and told her it was probably jackrabbits. The quiet between gusts felt deep, but not threatening. I rolled over and found sleep again. Dawn broke with that famous panhandle sky, huge and clear. I let Miso explore a bit while I made coffee and shot some morning light on the canyon walls. No odd signs around the van. I laughed a little at how the open space made last night's alertness seem silly. We packed easy and I drove a short ways to a better overlooked spot I'd scouted, feeling the road freedom hit right. Miso napped in the sunbeam on the dash. The day warmed up nice. I hiked a short trail with her in the carrier, took more photos, and planned the next few days exploring the canyon edges. The vast emptiness felt freeing rather than empty. By afternoon, I'd found another pull-off, even more sheltered by a low mesa for the coming night. Already looking forward to golden hour again. I set up at the new spot as the sun dropped, cooking rice and beans while the canyon colors shifted deep. Miso chased grasshoppers on her leash, looking content. For hours the evening felt perfect, the kind of panhandle magic that makes the long drives worth it. I reviewed shots on a laptop and texted a couple to my brother back east. Night brought stronger wind, but the van held steady. I secured everything and read until late. Miso slept heavy. Around 1:15, the wind died completely for a stretch. That total silence pulled me awake. Miso lifted her head toward the rear doors. I stayed still and listened. Nothing at first, then a faint scrape like metal on rock far off, carried on a returning gust. I waited it out in the dark. The sound didn't come again right away. I thought about real stories from other photographers who'd camped in remote deserts, usually just curious animals. This felt similar. I gave Miso some treats to settle her and tried relaxing. The van creaked once in the wind. Everything else stayed quiet. Morning light showed nothing unusual. I made breakfast, let Miso roam, and decided to stay another night since the light was so good. We spent the day hiking easier trails and shooting. Normal conversations with a couple day trippers at a viewpoint helped ground me. Laughter came easy again. Evening setup felt routine. Dinner was good, sky spectacular. I turned in early feeling tired but satisfied. Around midnight, Miso paced the aisle. I heard what sounded like footsteps in the grass, slow and deliberate, circling wide. My pulse jumped. I whispered to her and gripped my flashlight. The steps faded with the wind. I didn't sleep much after that. At first light, I checked around and found a single set of boot prints in a soft patch maybe 30 yards out, heading toward the van then away. Disturbing how they appeared overnight. I brushed it off as a lost hiker, but packed up anyway, aiming for a busier canyon campground. The established campground had a few sites taken. I paid the fee and settled in, relieved by other people nearby. Miso relaxed. I chatted with a family from Amarillo about canyon trails and shared some photos. The normal talk pushed the night's unease back. We had a calm afternoon exploring together. Night fell with distant coyote calls. I locked down and slept better surrounded by voices. Around 3, the van rocked once hard, like a shoulder check. Miso yowled. I yelled out and grabbed the pepper spray. Nothing followed. In the morning, I found the boot prints again, closer this time, circling my tires. The horror of being watched in broad daylight crept in while I packed. I left for a different area near the Canadian river breaks, hoping distance would help. The van ran fine, but I kept checking mirrors. Stopped in a small town for supplies and mentioned the prints to the clerk. She shrugged and said folks still wanted those old ranch lands. Her casual tone helped a little. By late afternoon, I found another prairie spot, more open. Setup went quick. Dinner passed peacefully. Miso played. I allowed myself to think the prints were coincidence. Wind picked up at dark, and I turned in early. Then the tapping started on the undercarriage around 2 a.m., rhythmic and patient, moving section by section. I stayed frozen while Miso hid. It lasted nearly 20 minutes before stopping. The disturbing patience of it stuck with me until dawn. I drove out at sunrise, engine sounding normal, but my nerves shot. Found a truck stop near Demise and parked in the lot under lights. Some rest came in fits. Morning brought a decision to head southeast toward more populated routes. The drive went long. I stopped near Childers for the night in a Walmart lot, but security moved me on. Ended up on a rural county road outside town near some old cotton fields. It looked hidden enough. Setup was tense. Miso wouldn't settle. Dinner was quick. Around 11 the wind died, and I heard voices, 2 or 3 low, talking about the white van with the New Mexico plates. My stomach dropped. They stayed a distance, but moved closer over the next hour, footsteps in the dry grass. I texted my brother my location with shaking fingers. Signal weak. They tested the doors once, quiet. I shouted I was armed. They backed off, laughing softly. I started the engine, but they'd wedged something under the rear tire. The horror built as flashlights swept the field. I worked the van free, sweating, and drove blind into the night, losing them on back roads. I made it to a brighter rest area near Wichita Falls by dawn. Exhausted, I cleaned up and let Miso out carefully. Some calm returned with truck traffic around. I thought about quitting the panhandle entirely and pushing south. The next day, I drove hard, stopping only for necessities. Found what looked like a safe spot near a state park boundary in central Texas by evening. Setup felt hopeful. Dinner tasted better. Miso relaxed some. I watched the stars and believed the worst had passed. Deep night, the side door lock clicked open. I'd missed checking it fully in my fatigue. A shape filled the doorway fast, smelling of dust and sweat. Pain bloomed in my shoulder from a strike. Miso screamed and hid. More figures piled in. They worked fast, taping my mouth and binding me while the van rolled under new hands. Miso stayed silent in her hiding spot. They drove hours in an empty ranch land I didn't recognize, talking low about needing parts and how easy vanlifers made it. The pain in my shoulder throbbed steady. They pulled off near an old abandoned feedlot under a quarter moon. Dragged me out first. The ground was cold dirt mixed with dry manure. They took their time with tools from my own van, cutting slow while describing others who'd parked in the wrong panhandle stretches. I thought about unfinished photo projects, about Miso alone, about how the open road had betrayed me. The work went on until my vision tunneled. They kept me conscious long enough to watch them unload gear and debate keeping the cat. One laugh cut through the night when they found my camera. By the end, the only sounds were wind across the grass and distant cattle. They buried most of what remained in a shallow trench behind the old pens and drove the clean van away toward new plates and a buyer. Miso was never found. Another missing traveler story that never made local news. The Texas prairie closed over the spot like it had done many times before, indifferent under the wide sky. No traces left by morning. My name is Donovan Pike. I'm 59 years old, and these days my home is a well-worn 2014 Mercedes Sprinter that I fixed up after retiring early from the refinery down in Beaumont. I share the space with Boone, my old blue-tick coonhound who's getting gray around the muzzle, but still bays at nothing when the mood strikes. Right now we're way down in South Texas near Falcon Lake, after I followed a tip about quiet dispersed spots off US 83 south of Laredo. I backed the van into this scrubby clearing surrounded by thick mesquite and prickly pear, the kind of hidden pull-off that barely shows on maps, but offers a glimpse of the lake in the distance. It felt remote enough for real solitude. I grilled some sausages at dusk, tossed Boone a few pieces, and watched the border country sky turn blood red while he sniffed the perimeter. The heat dropped slow once the sun vanished, leaving that dry brush smell mixed with distant water. I sat in the open sliding door with a warm beer, scrolling weather reports and sending a quick check-in to my son up in Dallas. Boone settled on his bed with a heavy sigh. The same routine we've kept for 2 years on the road. I ran through my checklist, curtains drawn tight, doors locked, a bungee cord on the handle out of old habit from refinery night shifts. The van felt like the reliable steel box it always had. I climbed into the bed platform around 10, left the vent open for air, and listened to the soft tick of cooling metal. Sleep came easier than it had in weeks. I woke around 1:30 with a full bladder and handled it inside with the portable setup, moving quiet to not disturb Boone. The outside world sat completely still, no wind rattling the brush, no night birds. I lay back down thinking about how this country reminds me of long ago drilling sites where the silence could play tricks on a man after 12-hour shifts. Boone stayed relaxed. I closed my eyes and focused on the steady rhythm of his breathing until I drifted again. Another hour passed before I stirred, mind turning over small details like the way the mesquite branches looked undisturbed when we pulled in. Nothing worth worrying over. I'd had nights like this before where every shadow seemed off but proved harmless by morning. Boone sighed once and stretched. The van remained my solid little fortress, same as always through storms and bad roads. I must have slept deeper after that because the next awareness came with Boone shifting position, ears flicking but no growl. The quiet outside felt heavier now, pressing in during the lulls between distant coyote yips. I told myself it was just the desert playing its usual games and rolled over, thinking about coffee and heading towards Zapata at first light for supplies. Practical things like full tanks and stock food helped settle my thoughts. Boone went still again. The dark stretched on without incident. I let my mind wander to that one time Boone treat a raccoon near the Louisiana line. Loud, but nothing serious. This felt quieter, almost watchful. My pulse stayed even. I breathed slow and let the night carry me back towards sleep, the van rocking gently on its suspension. Boone's low rumble pulled me awake sharp at 4:12. I stayed flat, hand on his neck, listening hard. A soft scrape came from near the front bumper, then nothing. I whispered easy to him and eased up to check the gap in the curtain. Blackness and mesquite silhouettes, no lights, no movement. My mouth felt dry as I waited through long minutes of silence. I sat there gripping the mag light, mind running practical checks. Tires looked fine yesterday, no obvious mechanical issues. Boone settled, but kept watching the door. Then came a single, deliberate tap on the hood, metal on metal, followed by absolute stillness again. The weight of that quiet settled heavy in my chest. I didn't move for what felt like half an hour. Dawn arrived gray and slow. I checked outside carefully and found the ground around the front tires scuffed in a way that didn't match our arrival tracks. Boone sniffed it and backed off quick, tail low. Disturbing how precise the marks looked. I packed camp faster than normal, got the van started, and rolled out toward the highway with Boone riding shotgun. The engine noise felt like safety. I stopped in a small town for breakfast tacos and let Boone stretch in a patch of shade. The lady at the counter asked where I'd camped. When I mentioned the spot near the lake, her eyes flicked away for a second before she smiled again. I paid and left without pushing. The day warmed up, and I found a new pull-off closer to the main road by late afternoon, more open with other vehicles visible in the distance. Setup felt steadier. I cooked, walked Boone, and watched the sunset ease the tension from my shoulders. For a few hours, things felt normal again, the kind of evening that makes you forget small disturbances. Night came with a light breeze off the lake. I secured everything extra tight and turned in early. Boone slept sound. Around midnight, the tapping returned, this time on the side panel near my head. 3 measure knocks that made my skin tighten. I didn't answer. Boone pressed close but stayed quiet on command. The sound circled once before fading into the brush. I stayed awake until light, heart working harder than it should. In the morning, I found more scuffs under the van near the fuel fill. I topped off from my spare can anyway and decided to keep moving east away from the immediate lake area. The drive took me toward freer, then north on smaller roads, looking for busier spots. I landed at a county park with some other campers by mid-afternoon, shared the shade with Boone, and chatted with a retired couple from San Antonio about fishing the area. Their normal talk helped push the night's events back. We spent a calm evening around a shared fire pit. Boone relaxed with their dog. Night in the park felt safer with voices nearby. I slept better until around 2 when the van shifted slightly, like weight against the rear. Boone woke but didn't bark. I listened as footsteps moved away through dry grass. In the morning, I found fresh prints circling but staying outside the main camping area. The realization they'd followed made my stomach knot. I left early and pushed toward a rest area near Alice. Mechanic checks showed nothing wrong, but the fuel efficiency seemed off. I paid and kept rolling, sticking closer to towns. Afternoon brought some relief with normal traffic and stops. Boone napped peacefully. I started thinking the worst was behind us. Evening found me in another semi-hidden spot off a farm road with good sight lines. Dinner passed quiet. I turned in hoping for unbroken sleep. Around 1, the voices started. Low, 2 or 3 people talking near the brush about plates and solo setups. My blood ran cold. They stayed at distance, but the words carried on the wind. I started the engine without lights and eased forward. They scattered. I drove until I hit brighter lights near a truck stop and parked among the rigs. Some shallow rest came, but the tension never fully left. Morning inspection showed a small cut in one brake line. Slow leak, fixed with what I had. The disturbing care they took stuck with me. I aimed for the coast now, figuring more people and open space would break the pattern. Boone seemed as ready as I was. We made decent miles with the windows down and radio on. I reached a quiet coastal prairie spot near Baffin Bay by late afternoon. The Gulf breeze felt cleansing after the brush country. Setup went smooth. I walked Boone along the water edge, letting him chase ghost crabs while I breathed easier. For several hours the day felt like old road trips again, light and free. Dinner tasted better than it had in days. Night brought steady wind that masked smaller sounds. I locked down and slept deeper. Then around 3, the van rocked hard from the passenger side. Boone exploded in barks. I yelled and grabbed the tire iron. The rocking stopped, but footsteps lingered nearby. I sat braced until dawn, every muscle tight. Morning light revealed deep dents in the panel and more prints. I packed and drove toward Corpus Christi for a busier lot. The mechanic there found additional tampering. Wires pulled loose under the dash. Cost time and money. The horror of how long they'd been at it settled heavy while I waited. I pushed north toward busier highways, but fatigue caught up. Ended up on a rural stretch near Refugio after dark, too tired to keep going. Setup was rushed. Boone refused food. Around 11, the group returned, bolder now, circling close and testing doors. One face pressed to the window briefly, sunken eyes, expression flat. I barricaded and called emergency services. Spotty connection. They worked on the tires while I shouted threats. I finally broke free by getting the engine and bouncing over rough ground, losing them temporarily on county roads. I drove exhausted until a well-lit truck stopped near Victoria. Some calm returned with people around. I allowed myself to think one more good push would clear it. Boone finally ate. I planned a route toward Houston, where I still knew people. Morning brought clear roads and hope. I made solid miles, stopping only when needed. Boone seemed brighter. By evening, I found what looked like a safe industrial lot edge near Baytown with cameras visible. Setup felt almost routine. I cooked a solid meal and watched the lights of the city in the distance, believing the nightmare had finally broken. Deep sleep took me around 1. The rear door clicked open, lockpick clean while I rested. Boone lunged, but caught a boot that sent him yelping. Pain seared across my ribs from a blade as they piled in. They worked fast and quiet, securing me while driving my own van into the night. Boone whimpered from the corner. They took us deep into empty coastal marshland near an old industrial canal. Dragged me out first under a cloudy sky. The ground was wet mud and shell. They used my own tools in a slow, practiced way while describing other vans they'd taken along the border routes and coastal backroads. I thought about my son, about unfinished retirement plans, about how the road had led me straight into their hands. Boone went silent after a sharp kick. The pain stretched long and deliberate until my world narrowed to their voices and the smell of salt and blood. They kept me aware for most of it, making sure I understood this was their stretch of Texas. By the end, the only sounds were water lapping and wind through the reeds. They loaded what they wanted, cleaned the van thoroughly, and rolled it away toward new ownership. My body and Boone's went into the soft marsh where the tide and wildlife would handle the rest. Another transient gone, another rig absorbed without trace. The Gulf Coast kept its secrets like it always had, waves rolling over the same indifferent mud. I woke to the smell of dust inside the van, stronger than it should have been with the windows cracked. My shoulders ached from lying tense most of the night. Marcus was already sitting up, rubbing his face and staring at the side door like it might open on its own. Lena kept her flashlight pointed at the floor, the beam shaking just enough to notice. We decided to step out together and look around. The moon had dropped low, leaving everything in that flat gray light before dawn. I walked the perimeter with my headlamp, checking for tracks or signs we'd bottomed out on a rock. Nothing obvious, just our own footprints and some scattered animal scat. Still, the air carried a heaviness that made conversation feel forced. Marcus found a few odd gouges near the rear tire, parallel lines too clean for mesquite or casual scrapes. He knelt and ran his fingers over them, joking it looked like someone dragged a rake under there for fun. Lena took photos anyway, the shutter clicked loud in the stillness. I felt that familiar twist in my gut, the one that says keep moving but your body wants to freeze. Back inside we made coffee and tried to shake it off. I told him about the time my rig got stuck near Monaghan Sandhills and how laughing about it later made the tow bill easier to swallow. Lena shared a story from a solo trip in the hill country where she swore she saw lights moving where no roads existed. We traded small talk like that, the kind that fills space when nobody wants to name what's bothering them. By mid-morning, we agreed to stay put another day. The spot was too good for pictures, and the weather looked clear. Marcus worked on a loose cabinet hinge while I checked the engine bay out of habit. Lena wandered a short distance with her camera, staying in sight. Everything felt almost normal again, the sun warming the metal and drying the dew. Then the radio crackled once, even though it was off. A burst of low static followed by what might have been a voice cut short. We all looked at each other. Marcus shrugged it off as a loose wire he'd fix later. I nodded, but kept glancing toward the boulders that blocked the road view. Afternoon brought a short hike along the riverbank. We found an old rusted canteen half buried in the silt, the kind from decades back. Lena cleaned it up and laughed about adding it to her collection of road junk. I felt myself relaxing, the earlier tension easing as we skipped stones and talked about where we might head next. Maybe up toward Marfa for the lights. Back at the van, the gouges looked deeper in the daylight, like whatever made them had returned while we walked. Marcus swore they weren't that bad earlier. None of us had a good answer. We secured everything tighter than usual before evening settled in. I cooked dinner that night, extra portions because stress always leaves me hungry. We ate in relative quiet, the kind of companionable silence that still carries an undercurrent when your mind won't settle. My name is Harlon Whitaker. I'm 42 years old, and I come from a little place outside Abilene, Texas. I've been on the road full-time for almost 3 years now, chasing quieter stretches of highway after my divorce left everything feeling too loud back home. Tonight, I'm parked with my buddy Marcus, 38, a former mechanic from Odessa who joined me 2 months back after he got tired of the same shop shifts. We also have Lena, 29, a freelance photographer from Austin who hitched a ride with us in San Angelo because she wanted shots of the back roads most folks skip. We pulled off FM 170 west of Lajitas just after sunset, tucked the van behind some boulders where the Rio Grande bends tight against the rock. It felt like the perfect stealth spot. No lights from the road, just the river murmuring and the stars thick overhead. Marcus cooked beans and rice on the little stove while Lena showed us some of her desert photos from earlier that day. I laughed when she teased me about burning the coffee again, like I always do when we're low on propane. The air cooled fast once full dark settled in. I stepped outside to stretch my legs and check the tires, the kind of habit you pick up after too many mornings stuck in soft sand. Everything looked normal, just a faint glow of our lantern inside the van and the low rush of water. Marcus joined me for a smoke, talking about how his ex used to hate when he disappeared on weekends like this. We climbed back in around 10, slid the side doors shut, and killed the lantern. I took the rear bed, Marcus the converted bench, Lena up front in the passenger seat she'd padded out. The silence felt good after hours of driving. I lay there listening to the others breathe, thinking how this life still surprised me with its small comforts even when money got tight. Then came the first odd moment, a soft scrape against the undercarriage, like something dragging slow across the gravel. I told myself it was probably a branch the wind moved or an animal sniffing around. Marcus muttered something half asleep about javelinas and rolled over. I waited, eyes open in the dark, but nothing else followed right away. I must have drifted off because the next thing I noticed was the van shifting just a fraction, the way it does when one of us gets up to use the bucket at night. Except neither of them was moving. I stayed still, heart picking up a notch, telling myself it was only the cooling metal settling. Lena whispered from the front if I was awake. Her voice carried that edge people get when they're trying not to sound worried. I said yeah, asked if she heard it too. She described the same scraping, low and deliberate. We both listened hard. The river kept its steady murmur, but now it sounded farther away somehow. Marcus woke up grumbling that we were imagining things after too many days without real showers. He cracked a joke about me finally paying for that bad gas station sushi from last week. We chuckled a little, the kind of nervous laugh that helps when the quiet presses in. I checked my phone, no signal, and told him we'd move at first light if it kept up. For now, we should try to sleep. The van felt smaller than usual as I closed my eyes again, the darkness thick around us. Night 2 pressed heavier. I lay awake, listening to the others pretend to sleep. Around 2 in the morning, the van rocked again, this time with clear weight shifting near the rear. I grabbed the tire iron I keep under the bed and waited. The motion stopped, replaced by a wet, dragging sound that circled once before fading toward the river. Marcus whispered we should start the engine and leave right then. Lena agreed, but reminded him the narrow track out required daylight to avoid dropping a wheel off the edge. I hated the idea of driving blind in the dark on that road. We compromised by turning on every interior light and keeping watch and shifts. My turn came first. I sat in the driver's seat with the doors locked, watching the boulders through the windshield. Nothing moved for a long stretch. I thought about my daughter back in Abilene and how I'd promised her pictures of this trip. The ordinary memory grounded me until a shape passed low between two rocks, too fast to make out clearly. I woke Marcus for a shift. He took the iron from me without comment. Lena stayed curled up, but her eyes stayed open. We spoke in low voices about normal things, like how Marcus once fixed a transmission in a parking lot during a dust storm. Small stories to keep the mind busy. The hours dragged. Just before dawn came a sound like fingernails on the roof, slow and testing. It moved from front to back, paused, then repeated. Lena covered her ears. I felt sweat on my back despite the cool air. We endured it together, counting seconds between each pass until it finally stopped. Morning light showed fresh scratches on the roof and hood, deep enough to catch the sun. Marcus tried to laugh it off as a big cat marking territory, but his voice lacked conviction. I suggested we pack up after breakfast and head east towards safer ground. We moved slow and deliberate, loading gear while scanning every direction. Lena dropped the lens cap and scrambled after it like it mattered more than anything. Small mistakes born of nerves. I caught myself double-checking the same strap 3 times. By the time we finished securing the van, the sun felt too bright, the quiet too complete. We climbed in, and I turned the key, ready to put distance between us and this bend in the river. The engine caught, but died immediately. I tried again, same result. Marcus slid into the passenger seat and popped the hood while I held the light. Everything looked connected, no obvious tampering, yet it wouldn't turn over. He worked fast, hands steady from years in shops, but I saw the sweat on his forehead. Lena stayed inside, watching through the windows. She called out when she saw movement near the boulders again, something low and pale that vanished when we looked directly. We kept working, voices tighter now. I told him about the time my battery died outside Fort Stockton and how a rancher helped jump me with jumper cables older than I was. The memory helped for about 30 seconds. Marcus found a disconnected wire that shouldn't have come loose on its own. He fixed it and we tried again. The engine fired this time, but ran rough, like it was fighting itself. We decided to risk the drive anyway. I eased the van forward, tires crunching loud on the gravel. We made it maybe 200 yards before the steering went heavy. The van pulled hard left toward the riverbank. I fought the wheel while Marcus reached over to help. Lena shouted a warning too late as the front tires sank into soft silt we hadn't noticed in the dark. We sat stuck, engine still running rough, the Rio Grande much closer than it felt last night. Silence returned except for the water and our breathing. I killed the engine to save gas, and we assessed the situation. Shovels and boards would be needed, but that meant getting out. Marcus went first, moving careful and quick. He started digging while Lena handed him tools from the door. I stood guard with the iron, eyes scanning the boulders and the brush line. The sun climbed, but the air stayed cold on my skin. A mistake happened fast. Lena stepped too far from the van to grab a better angle for leverage, and something grabbed her ankle from the low scrub. She screamed once, short and sharp. Marcus yanked her back hard. Her leg came free with long, ragged marks bleeding through her jeans. We dragged her inside and slammed the door. The bleeding wasn't arterial, but it looked bad, like torn by something with purpose. I wrapped it tight while she clenched her teeth and tried not to cry. The van felt like a cage now, the outside world suddenly hostile. We worked through the pain and fear, Marcus digging while I held pressure on Lena's leg and kept watch. The marks were deep and uneven, the kind that would leave scars if we got out of here. She kept apologizing for stepping out, her voice small in a way that twisted something in my chest. The van finally lurched free after an hour of sweat and cursing. I gunned it on a firmer ground, heart hammering as the tires found purchase. We cheered weakly, the relief real for a moment. Marcus bandaged Lena better with the kit and gave her water. I pointed us east on FM 170, driving faster than smart on that road. For 10 minutes, everything held. Then the engine sputtered again and died completely. We coasted to a stop in a narrow cut between hills. No shoulder, no room to push. The quiet returned heavier than before. Lena's breathing had grown shallow, the blood soaking through the wrap. I told him I'd walk for help, signal, or a passing truck. Marcus refused to let me go alone. We argued brief and sharp, the kind of fight that happens when fear strips patience. In the end, we all stayed, doors locked, waiting for daylight to bring travelers. Night fell again too soon. The sound started closer this time, circling without pause. Scraping turned to wet impacts against the metal, like hands slapping and gripping. Lena whispered she saw faces low to the ground, pale and wrong. I kept the tire iron ready, Marcus a knife from the kitchen drawer. The first window shattered on the passenger side. Glass sprayed inward and Marcus yelled as something hooked his arm and pulled hard. I swung blind and connected with a solid thud that made it release. Blood ran down his arm, but he stayed conscious. We barricaded as best we could. Lena went quiet after that, eyes distant from blood loss and shock. I held her hand and kept talking, telling dumb stories from my Abilene days to keep her present. The attacks came in waves, patient and testing. We fought back with everything we had left, the inside of the van turning chaotic with broken glass and blood. The final push came just before dawn. They came through the rear doors all at once, a rush of pale limbs and strength that didn't match their size. I saw Marcus go down fighting. Lena's hand slipped from mine. Pain flared bright across my side and chest as I swung until the iron was taken from me. The last thing I clearly remember is the cold river air on my face as they dragged us out into the gray light. The van door hanging open behind us like a mouth that finally let its secret out.